After year end, as you know, our year end is 31 March, but like most listed corporates, this issue of having audits to be reviewed in South Africa and so on has obviously been at play, which is why we couldn't publish our results before the legislated deadline in terms of the ZSE. However, all is well that ends well. We now have the results, and we are delighted to be presenting them to you. The format, as usual, John will come and speak through the numbers, and then I'll touch a little bit on the operations, and then we'll take questions, and we'll have a few eats, and hopefully each and every one of you will have an opportunity to go home with a bag of seed. Thank you. Over to you, John.
Thank you, Morgan. So I will go through the salient features of the results that you already have with you there. Just explaining a few things that I think are important. Okay, so just looking at the in revenue from 27.3 billion to 42.7 billion. I know these are ZWL. If you can make sense of the numbers, all the best. But in inflation, on the inflation-adjusted figures, that's a commendable growth. This was driven largely by 14% increase in volumes. Anchored largely by the sale of seed that we had produced in the previous year, most of it in ZWL. The other significant item that you see there in the income statement is other income of 36.8 billion compared to prior of 5.5. This is largely because of US dollar denominated sales that are settled in ZWL. This is largely to the government programs, invoiced in US dollars, but settled in US dollars, settled in ZWL. That's the reason for the that increase in other income. But just looking at the complexion of our revenue, there was a significant improvement in the revenue in US dollars that we generated during the year. Almost 40% of our revenue was in pure US dollars, that is combining the exports. The other 50% was in US dollars, sold to government programs, but settled in ZWL. So as a proportion, the US dollar sales increased significantly. Hence the reason for that increase in the profit from a loss of 2.2 billion prior year to a profit of almost 16 billion. So this is real income that was earned by the business. Then just looking at the volumes, maize, which is as usual the significant portion of our business, contributing 52% of our volumes. Volumes increased from 12,500 metric tons to 14,000 metric tons. Wheat, there was a slight decrease from 6,431 metric tons to almost 6,000. Those in the farming community would have witnessed significant problems in the power outages affecting the irrigation of that crop since it's grown in winter. No surprise is the soya, the soya beans, huge demand for the soya beans. Volumes increased from 3,300 metric tons to almost 5,000 metric tons. we focus continued demand for that soya. So just looking at the other aspects of that income statement, I've already commented on margins increasing from 33 to 41. Other income is what I've already highlighted. Operating expenses, the increase is largely because of the inflation. Most of the expenses, the pricing of those for most suppliers, they use the parallel market rate to stay alive. So you will see that the increase is quite significant. And then the JVs, this year, significant contribution came from Qton, which sells most of the seed to government. As usual, this was priced in US dollars, but settled in ZWL. So a significant chunk of that profit came from exchange gains. The international business, Seedco International, the profit decreasing slightly from that contribution of 0.6 to 0.5. I'll comment a bit further on the international. You will see from that slide, the profit decreased from 7.1 prior year to 2.9, almost 3 million in the prior year. Just looking at the summary of that income statement, you will see that the revenue is there. The business posted good performance in terms of turnover, increasing from 88.5 million to 103 million. The margin is good, decreasing slightly from 45 to 44%, but that's a good margin. However, the other line that reduced that profit are exchange losses, particularly in two markets, Zambia, where the exchange rate towards the end of the year moved from an average of 18 to almost 21 by the close of the financial year. And in Kenya, exchange rate moving from 103 to almost 126. So that swing towards the end of the year resulted in exchange losses, almost 4.5 million, compared to an exchange gain of 1.5 million the other year. So that's a swing of almost 6 million, which if you add to the 3 million there, that's almost 9 million profit that we would have had if we didn't have that exchange loss. What are we doing for that international group? We are changing the structure of the balance sheet. We're changing the complexion of the borrowings to localize the borrowings for financing or funding seed production. We used to use US dollars borrowed from Botswana to fund the USD requirements in the various markets. But because of the exchange rates, which are declining in most of these markets, we notice that in the long run we will suffer more exchange losses. So what we are doing is to localize the borrowings as we fund our production in there. So we expect an improvement going forward. But in terms of turnover, you will see, like I said, the revenue growing up. The volumes, good volume is there in most of the markets during the year. Now moving on to the balance sheet. Just wanted to comment on two issues there. The property, plant, and equipment increase there, it's because of revaluation to bring those values to fair values. Inventories increasing from 9.7 to 10.8. Most of the cash that we generated had to be put in the stocks to preserve value. Receivables increasing from 12 to 54. Significant chunk of that was to government programs. Happy to report that most of that has already been settled in full. And we've used that to retire the borrowings, the other side of the balance sheet, which you will see the borrowings increased from 9 to 24. Except for the long-term borrowing, the Propaco loan of 11.4 million that we had at the end of the year, the rest of the other ZWO borrowings have been paid up. Nothing really to add on the cash flow, except to say that most of the borrowings that we had at the end of the year have already been paid up. I think with those comments, I hand you over to Morgan to go through the operations.
All right, just looking at the general environment that we've been operating under, I think we all know what has been happening in Zimbabwe, unstable currency, hyperinflation, and we've had to operate in that environment. What we've obviously had to do is make sure we respond accordingly in terms of pricing, in terms of the strategies that we put in place to make sure we retain value for the business. So we've tried as much as possible to make sure that our sales track the currency movements by invoicing in US dollars, and yes, the customer, particularly the major customer, may pay us in ZWLs, but at the rate ruling on the date of payment. So you'll find that with the movement in the currency, particularly after our year, and we actually were able to handsomely pay off all our borrowings, and we hope that situation will continue. The relaxation of the currency markets has also enabled us to look at our balance sheet and say how is it that how is the best way to actually strengthen our position. So we are looking at the complexion of our balance sheet to try and make sure that we avoid major exchange risks. When you look at the other markets, the currencies have generally been very unstable. So you look at Zambia, the kwacha devalued. You look at Malawi, the kwacha devalued. You look at Kenya, the kwacha devalued big time. So it's been a big issue in our business in terms of currency movements. And what we are busy doing is realigning the complexion of our balance sheet to try and make the borrowings very much local. So we try and limit these fluctuations. Obviously, the big issue that then comes in is the interest cost, because the borrowings that we make in US dollars tend to be better priced. But this year, when you look at the international business, it then did get affected by those exchange rate swings, and we are trying to look at ways of minimizing those swings. I think in Zimbabwe, it's very difficult to tell where we are going in terms of the dollarization. Our business in Zimbabwe, the biggest customer is the government of Zimbabwe, and they are still paying us in ZWLs. I think the positive is we are able to invoice them in US dollars, and they are paying us at the rate prevailing on the date of payment. So we are not losing value. You will see that in our income statement, there's a big figure that is classified as other income. That's really as a result of revaluing those invoices. So you sell, you invoice in US dollars, and you put the sales in your books, but when they pay, the amount that's already in ZWLs in your books has changed because of the rate movement, and that income that is coming in, we are then classifying it as other income. But in real terms, it's really part of sales. It's coming from the sales. So it's not like a fortuitous exchange gain. It's really coming from the sales. It's just that in terms of the accounting standard, you can't put it under turnover. I think globally, we continue to be affected by the Russia-Ukraine war. We know that last year, the input prices went up quite significantly, particularly prices of fertilizers in some markets went up by almost 200%. And this ended up affecting our cost of production. So you find that in some markets, the price that we pay to growers in US dollars actually went up by close to 30%. And in the depressed markets of Africa, when your costs go up by 30%, bearing in mind that we sell to the small-scale communal farmers by and large, the ability to pass on costs becomes a bit of a challenge. So you find that our international business, as a result, got challenged significantly. The issue of the weather is still big. In East Africa, we had another drought. The rains came very late towards the end of our financial year, end of February. However, volumes, particularly in our key market of Tanzania, were very, very pleasing, and it's something that we continue to monitor. Just moving on to R&D. So You know, with the partnership that we went into with Limagrain in 2014, we've actually seen our research pipeline improving quite significantly. Every year, our research team is coming up with new varieties in all new categories, and the whole idea is to address the challenges that the farmers are facing in their respective regions. You'll find that they released 3 maize hybrids this year. That's 307, 449, and 561. They released a white hybrid sorghum, and they released 2 cowpea varieties and 3 pearl millet varieties. So our pipeline is quite huge in terms of all the maturity groups. I think we are very, very competitive. There were some maturity groups that we used to be concerned about, but at the moment, our pipeline is very, very good, and we don't have a problem meeting farmers' needs in any particular variety. What we've also been working on is making sure our varieties are registered on the regional catalogs, so the COMESA catalog and the SADC catalog. What that basically does is, if a variety is released in one country, you don't have to have it released in another COMESA country or SADC country again. You can just immediately start selling. So all these varieties that we are talking about that have been recently released, as soon as they get registered on these regional catalogs, we are then able to sell them in the various markets. We also continue looking at other crops like potatoes and rice, and we have some varieties that are nearing going to the market. Rice, we've started selling a bit of rice seed in some markets, but it's really ongoing business development. On the production side, we are now able to produce the seed that we want. We've got adequate quantities in all markets. In fact, in all markets, we are able to carry over seed. We've always targeted to carry over about 20% of the following year's production, and at this stage, we are probably around about the 30% mark. So it's always an important metric because it does prepare us significantly in terms of if there's a drought in the following year and so on. We've got adequate seed to be starting with. On the processing side, some of you witnessed the official opening of the artificial seed drying plant. It is working well. The whole strategy was to be able to produce seed early so that it can go into the market early by bringing it while it's still on the cob and drying it in-house. That is happening. We are drying about 5,000 metric tons, which enables us to meet early market requirements. So we are now able to meet demand as and when it arises, instead of waiting for the seed to be dried using the sun. The processing plant in Nigeria is also working quite well, and we've just embarked on building a processing facility in Tanzania, which should be completed in the next 18 months. As you know, we have been operating from rented premises, and it's a business that's been growing very, very fast, and we are starting to invest in own facilities there. Seed processing in all markets in full swing. Like I said, we have got adequate seed. Last year in Zimbabwe, for example, we sold about 15,000 metric tons. Coming in is about 22,000 metric tons plus carryover. What that basically means is we've got adequate seed. Our JVs and associates, so Prime Seed, that's our vegetable joint venture with HM Close. We've seen the turnover going up significantly. The major challenge coming from COVID and the Russia-Ukraine war was some of the supply chains were clogged up. But however, the turnover, we've seen it going up, which indicates a growth in market share and growth in volumes. And the key thing is translating that growth in turnover into growth in bottom line. Qton, the cotton seed associate, also did very well this year. It, by and large, sells most of the cotton seed to the government system. This year, the volumes were slightly lower than last year, about 10% lower than last year, but because of the pricing dynamics, we actually were able to recognize a handsome profit. When you look at the major associate, which is Seedco International, which owns the regional businesses, as you know, this business that we are talking about, Seedco Limited, owns 27% of Seedco International. Seedco International, from a top-line perspective, the turnover went up quite significantly from about 90 million to just over $100 million. However, this is the business where we had some huge challenges in terms of exchange rate movements. We actually ended up recording a negative movement of close to $7 million on exchange rate, and that affected the overall bottom line. And this is the reason we're having to rejig the complexion of that balance sheet to try and make sure that we retain the value that we are realizing top line and making sure it flows through to the bottom line. The margins have generally remained the same. 45% is fairly decent margin for a seed business. When you look at most of the international businesses, they are working at margins of around 30 and 40. So 45% we think is a very decent margin, particularly in a market where there have been some huge swings in terms of exchange rate movements. Our other major markets, the input programs got affected because of the challenges that those countries are going through. So Malawi, for example, they cut their input program quite significantly, and it was also introduced rather late. In Zambia, the input program also came in rather late, but we still were able to show growth in terms of turnover by pushing a lot of the volumes through the open market. In terms of outlook, I think the shocks that we are seeing globally, we expect them to continue to challenge the business. However, when we listen to the African governments, they are all prioritizing food production. And when we talk to the development partners, I think food remains the game for the future. And we are right at the beginning of that value chain. The group busy restructuring its balance sheets to make sure that any value that is achieved at the top line is retained by avoiding exchange losses. We have been listening to the early weather forecasts, and I think people have been talking of El Nino in most parts of Southern Africa, which is not really a good sign. But for us, what it does mean is we have to structure our sales basket appropriately, and we are trying to make sure we stock the relevant sales areas with early maturing varieties to try and address the limited rainfall that is expected. Country specific, in Zimbabwe, the business is expected to remain buoyant. We've already started talking to the partners that we sell through, and the demand is there. I think the big question mark is what's going to be happening on the currency, but we expect the demand to be there and the volumes to grow, and we've got adequate seed to sell. Tanzania is a business that we are very happy with. It has shown growth year in, year out, and if we had had enough seed in that part of the world, we would probably have sold another 2,000–3,000 metric tons. It's an area that we've addressed this year. We've got adequate seed to meet the demand in that market, and it's a business that's really going very well. Mozambique, the economy relatively stable. It obviously is an economy that depends very much on development partners, but we've seen our business stabilizing and recording a profit there. Zambia, the economic and currency issues obviously depend on their debt resolution with China. We know what has been happening to the kwacha over the last few months, and in fact at year end it actually did behave very strangely. Just before year end it was around the 17–18 mark, and then swung to about 21, and then after year end came back to the 17–18 mark. So what that effectively meant was we had to recognize that exchange loss, even though it self-corrected immediately after year end. Malawi, the economy continues to face some serious headwinds. It's an economy that depends on donors, but the government input programs are expected to continue. Kenya is a growing market. Currently, they are facing some post-election challenges, but we don't expect that to affect the demand for seed. Nigeria, which is our nascent market, which has been growing quite well, there have been quite a few security challenges, so accessing some of the areas that we need to sell seed. It hasn't been easy, and getting people to go to these markets has been a bit difficult. So that has slowed the pace at which that business has been growing. But our production has been doing well. We have been growing the market, although not at the rate that we would want to because of those unresolved security challenges that we continue to face. We are quite delighted that we've now been formally issued a business license in Ethiopia. It's the second most populous nation in Africa, and they grow a lot of maize other than teff. And over the last 10 years, we've been trying to get a business license to operate there, and it has been a challenge. We finally got that license in April, and we've started putting a team on the ground, and we think that will be a very important growth hub in East Africa. Overall, we think the group will show a very good profit going forwards. The issues that we are trying to resolve in terms of currency stability, I think we'll be able to retain value in the group. And food still remains the game. We are here for the future. We are here to be at the beginning of the food value chain, and long may it continue. I think that's it in terms of outlook and presentations. We'll take questions. Yes. So Terence is the MD of Seedco Zimbabwe.
What was the question again?
The wheat volumes.
No, the wheat volumes have actually been pleasing. You will note that our budget was 6,000 metric tons. We are sitting just 50 metric tons shy of our budget. We've actually done well on our sorghum and our barley. I think our barley, we've actually done double what we'd budgeted. So our winter selling season has been a success, and we are now looking forward to going to the summer season with so much joy, as the outlook is looking very exciting for us. Thank you.
Yeah, but I think the question was, there was a 500-ton decline from last year. Yeah.
No, we're not losing market share. I think that was because of the reduction in the orders that came to us via government programs.
It's also related to the capacity to irrigate with the power outages. And then the other factor is that the prior year we also had exports to Nigeria.
How did we work? I mean, look, I think the guys that do the crop estimates, Loka, do you know what the latest crop estimate is on wheat? You keep hearing some varying figures between 380 and 400, but it's a moving figure.
So the estimate right now is at about 86,000 hectares that the government has estimated that has gone into wheat.
At an average yield of what?
Average yield 4.8 metric tons per hectare.
So that's about 400,000 metric tons if that translates into reality. But I think the important thing in terms of your question, so the previous year we sold 1,000 metric tons of wheat to Nigeria, which was an export order which didn't repeat. That's why the volumes fell compared to prior year, because that, they were having their own elections in Nigeria. They ordered 1,000 metric tons of wheat, but actually it was never planned. So repeat business was then not there. Yeah, but I think if you look at that 84,000 metric tons of wheat. We've sold 6,000 metric tons of wheat. How many kgs do you need per hectare?
120.
About 120. So 6,000 would plant how many hectares? Where's take with the breeder? Tegwe is the wheat breeder, the wheat scientist.
Okay. Since we sold 6,000 metric tons, obviously we are looking at 75 to 80,000 metric tons if you are using 120 kgs per hectare. But unfortunately, on the ground, it's not all the farmers will be using 120 because the seeding rate varies from 120 to 140, depending on the method that you are using for planting. Thank you.
So if you are looking at what we sold into the market, it's capable of producing 75,000 to 80,000 hectares. So I think that 86,000 figure is probably realistic because there are a few other small players that also supply into the system.
Hello, I just wanted to ask, in volume terms, how much is the government acquiring in terms of maize and wheat in Zimbabwean market? Number two, what is your current strategy to hedge against climate change in the African economies, especially the Southern African part?
So the government buys roughly between 40 and 50% currently. Obviously, you can understand we are selling into the small-scale communal sector, and once there is a presidential input program and seed is being given for free, everyone will rush to collect it. So that does affect the open market. So quite a lot of the seed is going through the government system. I would say between 40 and 50%. Last year, out of the 14,000 metric tons, we probably sold about 7,000 or thereabouts into the government system local.
Yes, Chief, it was about 7,000, and then we sold about 5,000 through the open market.
And then we had some exports, yeah.
And the rest went through exports.
Yeah. And then in terms of climate change, so obviously that's why we're a science business. Our breeders, they are trying to come up with resistant varieties or varieties that respond to the weather changes. That's why we've been talking about our stocking plan this year and saying we have to put early maturing varieties in the network so that we can address the anticipated El Nino conditions.
Thank you. I've got two questions. My question is, can you please speak more into the Seedco International share of loss on the joint venture? I'm sure it's the second or the third consecutive year that that business has been recording loss. That sits on the Seedco International.
Seedco International, it
Yes,
didn't
there's a
record
share
a
of
loss. It
It's from
didn't.
the joint venture.
It didn't record a loss. It recorded a reduced profit. So, and that was largely because of the 6.5 million exchange losses that were recorded on that income statement. So you will find that in prior year, I think it recorded about 7 million. This year it ended around 3 million because of that swing of 6.5 million that came through the exchange rate movement.
Yeah, thank you. But my question is specific to the joint venture. There's a joint venture line item that's there on the Seedco International business, which has recorded a loss. I think this is now the third consecutive year that business has recorded a loss. So what mitigatory factors are you putting into the business to recorrect that?
Okay, yeah. So the joint ventures under Seedco International, first of all, there's the Prime Seedco joint venture, which we own jointly with HM Close, that's on the vegetable side. Then in South Africa, we've got a joint venture with Lima Grain. So we combined our three businesses, Seedco, Klein Karoo, and Link Seeds to form one business targeting to get about 10% market share. What we have actually seen is in the first year, I think it made a loss of about 20 million rands or something like that. This year, the projected loss is close to 1 million. And next year, we're actually expecting it to report a break-even position. What has been happening is we've been having to restructure it, and a lot of costs have been incurred in the process, just right-sizing it, making sure that the headcounts that we had from the three businesses, we don't have duplication and so on. So yes, there has been a loss, but the loss has been reducing.
Thank you. Then my second question, how successful were you in changing the route to the market? Last year you spoke of establishing new shops in the market. How successful was it, and what's the revenue mix in terms of US dollar to RTGS US dollar sales that you are having from the other customers which are not the government?
Yeah, I think we are, from the other customers, our revenue, if you look at our revenue, we probably ended up getting, so the revenue that's in that income statement, I think is about 64 million. And in terms of direct sales to through people like Farm and City and our own shops and so on, 30 million of that was actually through our own shops and our partners, and most of that was in US dollars. Any further questions? Are there any questions online, Robert?
Not yet. We are monitoring closely. Thank you.
Okay. Dr. Mabuyaya, who is our head of research, is here. Do you want to comment on what we are doing in terms of climate change?
First of all, I think the release of new varieties each and every season, that on its own is a hedge, because these varieties take a couple of years to be developed. So as you face challenges each season, you test that against the material that you have. But if you look at the material that we have in the maize program, for example, maturities, we are looking at 300 series all the way to 700 series. This basically defines all the agroecologies that we have. And if we are specific in terms of saying this area is going to receive this amount of rainfall and for this period, that is going to be catered for through maturity. We are looking at small grains, sorghum, pure millet, for those very, very dry areas where farmers cannot plant maize. These are the crops that are going in. We are happy that we've got sorghum, both red and white. Pure millet, brownish. We also have some sunflower that's coming in. So we are giving farmers a lot of options to choose from so that they make their farming productive. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Epi. Yeah, so the canola project is still very much at business development stage. We had specific customers who were requesting for canola seed to be included in the basket. We've produced some canola seed, but I think it's still very much early to, because you know the traditional market has been used to soybean as opposed to canola. So in terms of traction, in terms of seeing people take up canola significantly, the traction is still yet to be seen. On the borrowings, so we were able to access productive sector borrowings, and generally I would say the average there would have been about 100. As you know, it moved to 150, then 75, but the average probably about 100% for the local currency borrowings. For the international borrowings, the US dollar borrowings, an average rate of about 6% from the various banks that we deal with. I think the challenge that we did come across at some stage was to say, do we convert all our local borrowings to international borrowings to reduce the interest rate? And in fact, we did convert a little bit, but when the exchange rate moved, the majority of the borrowings were still in ZWL. So where you were owing, say, $8 million, it all of a sudden became $1 million, and it became a no-brainer. So going forward, it's something that we also have to take into account. You know, the US dollars are a lot cheaper, but ZIM being ZIM, because of currency issues, if you borrow in RTGS, you are assured of some sort of currency appreciation at some stage. Yes, sir. The value of our external obligations, John, do you want to check that? I think the biggest. Okay.
So is it end of the financial year where you were sitting about 11.4 million as the long term?
probable borrowing, we incurred that to build the artificial seed maize dryer. So that's, and we had to fund it using long-term borrowings. Yes, sir.
Thank you for the presentation. My question is more on the gross margins of the business. If you look back at the past 2 or 3 years, the margins have been a bit volatile, mainly because of this carryover stock that you then sell and then you get good margins. But once that carryover stock is out, then you're putting in more new inventory, and then the margin dips sometimes. So my question is, how sustainable is the margins that you presented on? You talked about 41%. I just wanted to know how sustainable is that, considering the carryover stock that you have, as well as the benefits from the artificial dryer that's coming online.
Yeah, so I think that is a thing that will continue, because it's, understand, when we are paying our growers, we are paying them 40% in US and 60% in local currency. Now that local currency, when you pay them, it hardens into whatever ZWLs you've paid them. And if there's a currency movement, there is going to be an impact on the margins. But our pricing always takes into account the cost of seed. So when we are pricing seed that goes into the market, we've got a deliberate target margin to make sure that margins are protected. So we always make sure that those margins are achieved.
Just a follow-up on Happiness' question. You spoke of a strategy that you want to localize the borrowing in the international business. Can you please comment in terms of the borrowing cost that you are having in Tanzania, Zambia, Zimbabwe, the relative USD borrowing cost? That's the ultimate, what would be the differences in terms of the borrowing cost?
Okay, so we, like we said, our average borrowing in US dollars is about 6%, but because the business in these countries, we are doing it in local currency. So in Zambia, we're selling in Zambian kwacha. In Malawi, we are selling in Malawian kwacha. In Tanzania, we're selling in Tanzanian shillings, Kenyan shillings, and so on. You then get exposed because you've borrowed in hard currency, but you are doing the business in local currency. Local borrowings average around 16% in terms of these markets when you are borrowing in local currencies. I would say the average is about 16%. Obviously, it varies from country to country, but local borrowings, that's more or less where we are. So you then have a trade-off between the cost of borrowing versus the exchange rate risk. And if you want to have a more certain environment, you would rather harden your borrowing costs so that you don't have these vagaries that do arise from the exchange rate risks. The interest rates in Botswana are 6%, because remember, that's where we are borrowing all our funds to fund the international business. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Just looking at your IP, I think the last point on your presentation, I understand you are releasing seed at the SADC and commercial level. I'm not sure in terms of the protection for your IP. How are you protecting your IP? Are you protecting it at that level or at the country level?
Yeah, so we are protecting it. Most of our IP is registered both here in Zimbabwe and in Botswana. For those varieties that we are doing in the region, they are by and large registered in Botswana because of the exchange controls and IP controls there. So we've got basically 2 IP registers at the moment, Zimbabwe and Botswana.
Good. Then the last question is the movement of your profits within the countries you are working in. Are you able to move money, seeing that you are facing quite a number of exchange issues in those markets?
Yeah, there's no problem whatsoever. Remember, in Botswana, there's no exchange control whatsoever, and the international businesses are controlled out of Botswana. In Botswana, if you want to move $20 million today, you just go to the bank, you fill in your little sheet, and the money moves on that particular day. And moving money from Botswana to these markets is not difficult. And likewise, moving money from these markets to Botswana, where the head office for Seedco International is not difficult at all. There are no currency movements and challenges. Where we do experience a bit of a challenge is because of currency shortages in certain markets. So you might find that at the time that you want to move money from Tanzania, the banks are a little bit short in terms of US dollars. So there will be that delay. But so that delay is not because of exchange controls, but because of general market liquidity. So, but that's something that we always try to address by dealing with a number of banks, so that you are not just relying on one bank to move your payments and so on. Yes, sir.
Could you comment on the dividend policy, if any? I noticed you paid a dividend from Seedco International, but it looks like Seedco did equally, well, but there's no dividend being declared.
Yeah, I think that's because of the Zim dollar element of the business. It's an issue that we've been toying with to say. Because of the borrowings, the rising interest costs, and also, when you declare a dividend, you don't pay it immediately on the day that you've declared it. There is always a delay, there is always a lag. And in a hyperinflation environment, when you have that lag, by the time you pay the dividend, it has completely lost value. So it's something that we are looking at, and we are trying to address by trying to make sure that our US dollar portion increases, because we can then channel that towards dividend. Declaring a dividend in ZWLs and taking 3 months before you pay it, the shareholder doesn't get any value at all. In the meantime, the interest rates have been very difficult to predict. I mean, you saw how they moved up the interest rates again. So it's just been a very difficult scenario to really fathom the best way to deal with the ZWL related dividends. Because if you wait for 2 months, they become nothing.
Just to follow up on the dividend question, does the company articles of association, does it speak to you guys doing share repurchases that you can cancel out in terms of whenever the stock price of your company is very low according to your internal valuations, where you can buy when you have excess RTGs? Do you also bet that idea?
Well, so it's basically an EGM issue. It's something that we decide in an EGM whether you want to be buying back shares or not. And we've passed those resolutions in the past, but I don't think we've ended up buying a significant portion. Because of the hyperinflation environment, it just negates the whole strategy sometimes. Any further questions? Are they making payments? Well, yeah, they are making payments. They are still paying us in ZWL. They are kind of drip feeding us at the moment. In the last few months, they were paying very well, but of late, they've just been paying us to make sure the business continues. I think we all know most contractors in the country have been complaining about a slowing down of payments, and we've also seen it in our business. However, we are receiving some payments, not as big as we would want to. How much did you receive last week, Terence?
We received 1.1 billion last week. They have been paying, I think just before 3 weeks ago, when they slowed down, we were getting something on a weekly basis.
Yeah. For the summer crops and...
It's a mixture of both. It's a mixture of both.
Okay.
Because the wheat comes directly from the Ministry of Agriculture, whilst maize from previous comes from other sources.
What we've always pushed for is direct market sales. We would rather be selling directly to the small-scale communal farmer, because then you get your money. It's almost a cash sale. I think the challenge with government input programs is what happens is as soon as anyone hears there's free seed, they don't buy. And as a result, we then have to depend on those systems. But we know that 90% of the maize in Zimbabwe is grown by small-scale communal farmers. That is the main economic activity that is done in the villages. They still need the seed. The challenge becomes at the root, particularly when the government announces that there is free seed. So if the free seed mantra ends in terms of the government, we then should see a bigger uptake in terms of direct sales to the communal sector, which is what we always used to do. You know, a lot of the seed was always going directly through the retail network, and that's actually what we would prefer, because your cash cycle improves, and you are then dealing directly with the market, and the market has got a choice in terms of which seed they want and so on, rather than the current system where they kind of end up getting whatever is supplied to them. Yeah, I think the government is a significant player in Zimbabwe and Malawi. In Malawi, it's almost 90% government. In Zimbabwe, like we said, about 40 to 50%. But when you look at markets like Zambia is about 20%. Kenya, it's 0% government. Tanzania, it's 100% open market. And that is our preferred route. When you look at the the Tanzanian balance sheet at year end, they are sitting on something like $7 million hard cash, because they are selling directly to the market. They are not having a big government data on the balance sheet. Any further questions, ladies and gentlemen? If not, we've got some eats and drinks upstairs, and I think you've all been given a ticket. The ticket is for you to collect seed as you drive out. You present that ticket to the guys at the gate, and they'll give you a 5 kg packet of seed. The seed this year is SC 555, which is a new variety that we are bringing in to replace the older varieties, and we would like you to be trying this new gem in your respective fields. Those that are online, the register is also being kept, and we will deliver your seed to our Win Street shop by tomorrow at 8 a.m. You can go to the Win Street shop and pick up your bag of seed, but you have to have been registered on that online register. You can't just rock up and say, I need my seed. Otherwise, yeah, thank you all very much. Join us for a few finger eats, and we can continue to entertain questions while we are mixing and mingling. Thank you. We need to move this to the... yeah.